Good morning, everyone. My name is Christopher Stevens. I'm a supervising engineer with the Division of Financial Assistance at the State Water Board. Welcome, everybody, to our 2019-2020 draft IUP workshop. This is for both the Clean Water SRF as well as the Drinking Water SRF this year. So again, welcome everybody, and welcome everybody on the web. Hopefully we've got a good audience there. So it's Tuesday, April 30th. 2019, about 9 o'clock. Just a few preliminaries here before we get into the presentations. So we had hoped to post both of the draft IUPs by mid-April. Unfortunately, that did not happen. The Clean Water has been posted. I believe it was posted as of Friday, so you can certainly see that one. We are still putting the finishing touches on the Drinking Water SRF IUP. I hope that will be posted by the end of the week. We're going to change the deadlines for comments appropriately for that. We have already gotten one question on the deadline for the Clean Water IUP. That is, according to the notice, noon on May 27th, which happens to be Memorial Day, so we'll change that to the following day so that it doesn't fall on the holiday. And because of that, because we weren't able to keep to our original schedule, people really haven't had sufficient time to go in there and read the documents and formulate questions. So we're going to schedule, we've already scheduled a second workshop to take questions. We'll certainly take questions today if you have them, but we're going to do another workshop on May 20th, and we'll send out a notice for that as well, give people more opportunity to read the documents and to formulate questions and have some more discussion about the contents of them. So today we're going to do the Drinking Water IUP first. We think there will be more discussion on the Clean Water, so we didn't want to run out of time for the Drinking Water. We'll do the Drinking Water IUP first, and therefore we will not start talking about the Clean Water IUP before 10 o'clock. So if you're more interested in the Clean Water IUP and you want to go get a cup of coffee, we will do the Drinking Water IUP presentation and discussion first. If it runs longer than 10, like I say, we'll start the Clean Water no sooner than 10 o'clock. If we're finished with the Drinking Water IUP discussion sooner than that, we'll just take a break and then resume at 10 o'clock for the Clean Water IUP. We've scheduled this for 4 hours today. I think there should be more than enough time for presentations and questions and discussions today. But we will take questions on the Drinking Water IUP, start the Clean Water at 10 o'clock. At the end, we should have plenty of time for questions on Clean Water as well as Drinking Water IUP. So with that, I will do some introductions. Again, my name is Christopher Stevens. I'm with Division of Financial Assistance. We have Leslie Loudon, who's the Deputy Director of DFA. Nicole Morgan, who's one of my counterparts for the Office of Sustainable Water Solutions. Mr. Lance Reese, who's over all of the admin associated with the SRF programs. Mr. Dat Tran, who's also another supervising engineer. Josh Rulig is one of the staff engineers, works on Drinking Water SRF projects. Bob Puntereri is one of my senior engineers. He'll be doing part of the presentation today. Win Trin Lay is another senior engineer that works for me on the Drinking Water SRF side. Beth Brown, one of the staff engineers. Tatiana Gwilin, who's another staff engineer. And then manning or womaning the cameras and whatnot, all the audio visual, is Elnaz Nasai, another one of my staff engineers. So again, welcome everybody. And so we do, for those folks that are on the web, we do have email addresses for you to send in questions. We'll talk about those as part of the presentation, but just to repeat those plenty of times so people know where to send their email questions. For the Drinking Water SRF, it's Drinking Water SRF as one word at waterboards.ca.gov. And then for the Clean Water SRF, it's Clean Water SRF, you couldn't guess that right, at waterboards.ca.gov. So, And just one last reminder here before we get into the presentations. So these are scheduled to go to the Water Board meeting on June 18th. They'll both go on June 18th. And for those that are here in the room, so emergency exits, look around. You can see the exit signs there. Of course, I think the best emergency exit route would be out the door where you came in. And then restrooms, go out the door here to my left and take the first left, and then the first right is where the restrooms are. I think that's all the preliminaries here. So again, we're going to talk about the drinking water SRF IUP first. we're going to split this up and do 3 presenters here. I'm going to sort of kick it off with the introductory slides. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole. She's going to highlight things that are for the Office of Sustainable Water Solutions, grants and principal forgiveness, in particular for small disadvantaged and small severely disadvantaged communities. And then Wintrin Lade is going to wrap it up, talking about the Fundable List, how we develop the Fundable List, and the schedule, and those sorts of things. So we'll do some introduction, talk a little bit about the program background. Of course, the finances of the program are very important. That underlies all the things that we do with the programs. We'll talk about our analysis, both of what we have in the way of applications and how that matches up with the finances of the program, how we develop the Fundable List. Highlight some what's new with the program, what's the same with the program. Then our implementation and schedule, and then, of course, the process for submitting comments. And then wrap it up with some questions. So I did the introductions, and again, as a reminder for those that are on the web, if you want to submit questions, we've got staff here that are monitoring the email box, drinkingwatersrf, one word, @waterboards.ca.gov. So a little bit about the program background. Hopefully most of you know this, but I don't want to assume that you are all familiar with this. So the Drinking Water SRF was established in 1996 by amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act. Low interest loans, combination of low interest loans and some principal forgiveness to public water systems for drinking water improvements. Of course, we also have state funds that come to the Water Board that are appropriated to the Water Board, usually in the way of bond measures that the voters approve. So we put those things together with the Drinking Water SRF funds that come to us from EPA, that are granted to the State Water Board from EPA, and we use those to complement each other. And so really when you submit an application to the State Water Board, you're not submitting, we don't have different applications for different funding sources. We have one application. We will put together the best funding package that we can based on whatever funding sources we have at the time. So we put those things together and try to run them simultaneously. So the Drinking Water IUP, and this is true of the Clean Water IUP as well, it really covers not just the Drinking Water SRF program proper, but all of those programs, tries to describe them in a holistic way. And then, of course, we've got the Drinking Water SRF policy, which also covers all of those funding sources, and that was last amended just a short time ago, February 5th of this year. Projects are generally prioritized to address the most serious public health problems, address those most in need on a household affordability basis, and ensure compliance with Safe Drinking Water Act requirements. Just a few basics on the IUP. So the draft IUP, like I say, will be posted there. It's posted. There's a web page that is devoted to all the comments, all the documents that the board put out for public comments. Again, you can see the clean water is posted there. We hope very soon that the Drinking Water SRF, the draft will be posted there as well. As I've alluded to, we get money from the federal government, grants from EPA. that capitalize the drinking water SRF program. So every year we submit an application to EPA for that, what they call a capitalization grant. And that's one of the big objectives of the IUP. As a stakeholder, you may or may not be interested in some of those things, but you'll see quite a bit of information in there for EPA's sake as part of the capitalization grant application that we submit. But I think more importantly, it's really a business plan for the drinking water SRF and those complementary funding sources. So, you know, it talks about the finances of the program, the staffing of the program, the resources that we have, and then our goals for the program and how we're going to try to achieve those goals. So that's really the overarching objective of the IUP for the programs. So stop me at any time if you have any questions. Just a little context here. So recent financing by the Drinking Water SRF and complementary financing programs. You can see going back for the last 3.5 years or so. Roughly a little over $300 million each year. You can see certainly when we got Proposition 1 funds that the number of agreements really jumped up there in 16, 17, and last year. Now one thing you'll probably notice, and we'll touch on a little bit here, and you've probably gotten wind of what's called Fiscal. The state is in the process of implementing a new accounting and budgeting system. And so you'll notice that this year our numbers are quite a bit less. And that's largely due to the Fiscal implementation that we've been going through. So good segue to talk about Fiscal. So we started implementing Fiscal last year, the beginning of this fiscal year, which was the middle of last calendar year, July 1, 2018. We started that for new commitments. Now originally we thought that the conversion of past commitments would come later this year. That schedule was accelerated, so we started converting existing commitments, which were people that had agreements previous to July 1 of last year. We started that conversion process in January of this year, January 31st of 2019. So it's really caused quite a few delays in our normal process. If you're a recipient or you're an applicant, you've probably noticed that. So it's delayed executing new agreements. It's delayed us amending existing agreements for their final budget and other amendments. We amend agreements for a number of different reasons. And it's also slowed down our disbursement, our processing time. Now, we've done everything that we can to try to alleviate those delays. We've shifted a lot of staff resources. Lance, and particularly, had a huge impact on the administrative staff. It's been necessary to shift administrative staff from doing credit reviews, doing disbursements, doing other things that they would normally do, shifting those resources over to try to do those conversions as quickly as we can. Prioritizing conversions. Disadvantaged communities and severely disadvantaged small communities are always a priority, but we're also trying to, we're not trying to do this necessarily chronologically, but trying to do it based on need. And so certainly folks that have submitted pending claims, that's a big factor in deciding what to convert. And then trying to bundle claims if possible, although that's not always possible. Sometimes, you know, we don't, there isn't a minimum amount of time for you to submit a claim, so if we can put multiple claims together, that's one thing that we can also do. So we recently, I don't want to say totally finished the conversion process, because that's not true, but we're definitely on the tail end of that process. So we are starting to see a little bit of light. But this is a new system. We're not totally familiar with it. It does require additional work that we didn't have to do in our old system. So we're not exactly sure what the new normal is going to be or when we're going to get to the new normal. I think it will be sometime in the next year, but that's kind of an open question at this point. you open that door for me, Wynn? Can we go to the next slide? Okay. Okay, let's talk a little bit, thank you, Nicole. Let's talk a little bit in general about eligibility. So this is, in general, there are certainly unique aspects of projects, and so this is, you should look at this as a starting point, and hence the note there in red. Eligibility may depend on the applicant type and the funding source, but generally eligibility for drinking water SRF or its complementary funding is eligible applicants would be publicly owned community water systems, privately owned community water systems, and nonprofit non-community water systems. And again, in general, eligible costs, planning costs, project design costs, construction management, administration, and environmental documents are generally the things that we would cover, would be eligible for financing, either grant or loan financing. So, financial outlook for the program. So recently we've tried to look at both SRF programs as what's a sustainable financing level. We have started leveraging the Clean Water SRF program. We've been leveraging the Clean Water SRF program for the last several years. We just priced bonds for the Drinking Water SRF program last week. I was down in San Francisco for that. We'll close on that in a few days. So that's the first leveraging in California for the Drinking Water SRF program. So we're trying to look at both of those programs on a sustainable financing level. So our target for the Drinking Water SRF program, about $400 million per year in loan funds. That's a loan capacity. Of course, drinking water systems, many of them tend to be very small and they have difficulty affording a loan. That's where principal forgiveness and grant funds come in, are very critical to financing those types of communities. So this year, estimated numbers for small community grants and principal forgiveness, about $215 million. We also have money from Proposition 1 for groundwater cleanup and protection. So that can, in certain cases, be used in conjunction with the SRF program. So there's about $675 million in grants there. I understand round 2 concepts were in early 2018, and then we'll be looking at additional solicitations in 2019 and 2020. So that's kind of the backdrop there. That's what we have as far as money goes. So what do we have? What are people asking for in the way of financing from those programs? So if you look at the comprehensive list in the draft IUP, you're going to see about 300 applications for $2.8, $2.9 billion. So existing small, severely disadvantaged and small disadvantaged projects, 98 or so, mostly looking for grant or principal forgiveness funds, about $190 million. New small disadvantaged and small severely disadvantaged projects, those are automatically going to go on the fundable list. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's money automatically for them, but they're automatically fundable. Another 110 projects, about $235 million. And then other projects that aren't small or disadvantaged, those are requesting placement on the fundable list, another 95 or so for about $2.4 billion. So I'm going to do this slide and then I will turn it over to Nicole to talk in a little bit more detail about funds that are available for small disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged communities. So the fundable list, you have to be on the fundable list to receive funding from the SRF or its complementary programs. only projects on the fundable list are eligible. But we're not as impacted on the drinking water SRF side as we are on the clean water SRF side. So we still left it in the last policy amendment. We left it pretty flexible for the Deputy Director of DFA. If some project is moving forward, making good progress, submitting the application, getting through the process, we can add a project to the fundable list. Again, small disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged communities, they automatically go on the fundable list at any time. So this would be somebody that's not in either of those categories. With that, I think I will turn it over to Nicole here. We can get the next slide there. Yeah, it doesn't seem very reliable there.
So, good morning. My name is Nicole Morgan. I'm supervising engineer in the division's Office of Sustainable Water Solution. So the office was created in 2015 to promote permanent and sustainable drinking water and wastewater treatment solutions. We provide grants, principal forgiveness, and low interest loans for planning and construction projects, utilizing state and federal funds to small disadvantaged communities. The applications are, so as Christopher was saying, the applications for small disadvantaged communities are automatically placed on the fundable list. These applications are not scored and ranked. So what we do is the division staff do an initial eligibility screening, and then, so that places the application on the fundable list. Then we recheck eligibility and we confirm it prior to funding. So currently, while the overall drinking water SRF program is not overly subscribed, as far as grants go, we are. So the current demand exceeds the funding that's available. So DFA staff, we qualify all the applications based for all the funding that may be available. That way, when you reach the finish line, you can actually receive funding versus just qualifying it for one funding source and then reaching the finish line and then that funding source being depleted. So then we also, what we do is we fund projects based primarily on the readiness to proceed and then availability of funding. And so with that, right now we're prioritizing construction projects. However, that does not mean if you have a planning project, you won't be funded. All that means is that if you are nearing that finish line and there's a construction project and a funding project that looks like they're going to get there about the same time and we only have enough money to fund one of the two projects, we'll fund the construction project first. The planning project, we've already qualified you for all funds that are going to be available. So as soon as new funds available, we will fund the project. So what is a small disadvantaged community? So first, small community water systems, it's less than equal 3,300 service connections or a year-long population of less than equal 10,000 people. The water system also has to serve the community with a median household income that is less than 80% the statewide median household income. That's for a disadvantaged community. For severely disadvantaged communities, the service area must have an MHI of less than 60% of the statewide median household income. This is part of our pre-qualification. We take a quick look to see where does the system fall and make that determination. And so this is the general eligibility requirements for grant and principal forgiveness. And once we've done this, we talk to you about where the system falls and work with you on it. We also have what we call expanded small community water systems. So this is basically double the size. It serves greater than 3,300 service connections, but less than equal 6,600 service connections, or year-long population between 10,000 and 20,000 people. But expanded small communities must serve a severely disadvantaged community in order to be eligible for grants or principal forgiveness. So we also offer technical assistance for small disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged communities. And this can include technical, managerial, and financial assessments. So that's also referred to as TMF. Funding application assistance, and so actually assistance at helping to complete the application and work through the process. Rate studies, income surveys, and so if there's a question of whether or not the system qualifies for grants or principal forgiveness, if they're right there on the borderline of being a disadvantaged community, we can help out with income surveys, and then also legal assistance. So for planning grants, so what we're looking at is what is the total cost of the project. And so if the project, in order for planning, if it is less than $500,000, that's underneath the maximum amount of the grant, we fund that amount. If it is greater than $500,000, so you get $500,000 in the grant, and then you can receive up to, then you can receive the remaining balance in a 0% interest loan up to 5 years. With good cause, if it's a consolidation project, if it's multiple systems, the deputy director can look at that, and so because it is per project, and so we could take a look at how much of the project is benefiting each system and can award above that. And once again, we're looking at what is the cost of the project. So on the construction side, it's, so let's see here. So for disadvantaged communities, if the MHI is less than 1.5%, per the IUPs, not eligible for principal forgiveness or grants. And the reason why is because we want to make sure that the system can operate and maintain the system after we've built one. And so what we're going to do is say, hey, let's go through a rate study. Let's take a look and make sure that you can operate and maintain the system. So we can do that through a planning grant and work with you on that, and we pay for that rate study. We can do that through technical assistance. If the rates are greater than equal 1.5% compared to the MHI, then eligible for 100%. So this is just for DACs. This is not for severely disadvantaged communities. This here does not apply. So if it's greater than 1.5% or if it's a severely disadvantaged community, eligible 100% of the costs up to $5 million. There is a maximum amount per connection of $30,000. But once again, we want to know truly what is the project. And then we work with you based on what the true project is. And that's it. So I'm going to turn it over to Wynn.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yunshun Lei. I'm a senior engineer with the Drinking Water SF. So my units cover mainly the other part of the Fundable List, the large water system that coming into the system, coming into the program looking for loan funding for the project. So the Fundable List that we put together, as you have heard from Christopher and Nicole, all of the DAC disadvantaged community and severely disadvantaged community automatically get on the Fundable List. And other large systems do have to be screened to see whether they could get on the Fundable List. And the breakdown, as you can see, for the small planning system, the large water system planning, and construction as well, you can see that we have a majority of the project on the Fundable List are small for planning and construction from the disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged system. But the large amount of the funds requests are from the large construction project with 50 projects, and the estimate cost of those are north of the $2 billion total However, in the second to the last column, you can see the SF loan amount that we projected or planning or estimate for the SF loan for this fiscal year total at $1.18 billion. Of those, there are more than 368 million that are looking for principal forgiveness or grant amount. So next, I would like to go over with what new with the drinking water SRF intended use plan this year. As you have heard, aware of that we have the drinking water SF policy amendment just got adopted back in February of 2019. And with that amendment, there are some changes there with the debt service coverage where we would increase the senior and parity coverage from 1.1 to 1.2. And we lower the supporting need coverage from to 1. And also with the change, the fundable list now, all of the small disadvantaged and small severely disadvantaged project will be automatically be on the list. Other fundable project not making progress to the financing agreement may be bypassed. And the deputy director would also have the ability to add project to the drinking water SF fundable list if they are making good progress and funds available for the fiscal year. So with that, we also update a form. So it will be coming up soon on our website with all of the 4 package, as you aware, that will be going through the FAST system as you would apply for any type of funding program with DFA or State Water Board. So continuing with the change recently with the policy amendment, we extend the planning financing term now that you would have the option to ask for a 5 years or 10-year term. And construction financing term would also be extended for the disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged, could be up to 40 years, or the project useful life, and with other project up to 30 years or the useful life. The loan repayment, we also change that from semi-annual to annual, and the first principal and payment and interest repayment will be 12 months after project completion for the non-DAC, non-SDAC, and 18 months after completion for the DAC or disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged system. Also, as you've heard, the drinking water SRF, the first time we leveraged the program, with that, the prepayment would now require the Deputy Director of DFA approval so that we can make sure we can maintain our coverage for the leveraging for the bond. So with all those chances, what remain the same? We have the match financing still available. The effective rate for a 30-year match is about 1.2%, so it's certainly better than the 1.9 that we are offering right now. So if you have a project, you might want to check into or look into the match option there. The application process remains the same with 4 application packages through the FAST system with the State Water Board website. And we accept application continuously as usual. The fundable list, I just want to point out that is not guarantee of the funding. So we put the project on the fundable list, but we review, and at the time of the financing, they must meet all of the eligibility criteria for funding. Retroactive planning and design eligibility remain the same. And all of those costs that incur must be documented. So for the large water system that's coming into us for construction fund, a lot of those could afford the planning to get ready to construction. So it's like on the fundable list, you don't see a lot of planning project from the large water system. Okay, so to the implementation, we are trying to execute all of the fundable agreement by June 30th, 2020. We have, if you recall the list, we have like 250 projects that on the list. That's mainly because all of the DAC, all of the disadvantaged or severely disadvantaged are automatically on the list. But we will be working through all the funding, like Nicole has explained in detail before. We will be issuing, reporting the mid-year status, and we will be posted on the website on the progress of the executed agreement that we've done. And every monthly, there will be an application status report on the fundable project posted on the website. And if there's any change or status will be that we modify, we'll provide additional information as well. And the schedule right now, we anticipate that the draft IUP for the drinking water SRF will be posted sometime this week. And with the late posting of the project, we'll be adding a second IUP workshop. It will be at 1 p.m. on May 20th, 2019, same location here. And the deadline to submit written comments will be moved to noon of either May 30th or May 31st, depending on when the IUP will be posted on our website this week. The board meeting, we consider bringing both the IUP for clean water and drinking water SRF still on June 18, 2019, and we will try to execute the project on the fundable list by the end of the fiscal year. So with that, we're covering some of the how you would submit comments to the program. The detail of the notice of opportunity to comments there would have on the detail of when, where, and how. The email would be sending to the address at the comments letters at waterboard.ca.gov. And we limit the size to less than 15 megabytes. So if you have document that larger than 15 megabytes, you can fax to the number on the screen there. Or you can, of course, mail it into the program. So also at the board meeting on June 18, you can submit, you can provide oral comments at the board meeting. I think that should be it. And if you have any comments right now, we will be happy to you have any question, we'll be happy to answer your question. If you are on the line, you can submit your question to the mailbox at drinkingwatersf@waterboards.ca.gov.
Great. Thank you, Wynn. So any questions for anybody today? Perfectly clear. Perfect as mud, right? Okay. Oh, hi, Alexandra.
So just to clarify, what about previously incurred construction costs? Are those also eligible?
So just to repeat the question, so we talked about previous planning and design costs before the financing is approved. So previous construction costs are eligible, but I'm going to put a big note of caution there. There is a risk there. So the most significant risk is if you go to construction before we execute an agreement, before we've reviewed everything and approved it, it's at your risk. If there's something there, some reason that prevents us from executing the agreement, then you're on your own as far as financing goes. The biggest single risk there's a number of risks, but the biggest single risk, of course, is in the environmental review. We are subject to what they call federal cross-cutters. The biggies are in the environmental review, Endangered Species Act, as well as Cultural Resources, National Historic Preservation Act. So we have to consult with U.S. Fish and Wildlife or sometimes the National Marine Fisheries on endangered species, and we have to consult with the State Historic Preservation Officer on the cultural resources. So if you've already started construction and we go to them and say, we'd like to consult with you on this project, they're going to discover you've started construction, and that really makes consultation with them very difficult. And it's happened before, and it's very ugly. We were able to resolve it. So the short answer to your question is yes, but with a big note of caution. Other questions?
I had a question on the fiscal. Is that a statewide, like all the state departments, Department of Water Resources, and are they all going to fiscal, or is it just the State Water Board?
The short answer to your question is yes, so all state agencies will eventually be on fiscal. It's a big job, so it's not all this year. This year we're part of a list of, I don't know, what's 50 or 60 or something like that, agencies that are converting. So a couple DWRs not, okay. Caltrans, okay. But yeah, it isn't just the water board, it's a number of agencies that are affected by fiscal. Yeah. Question on the web, okay. So the question on the web, when will the presentation be posted? Well, pretty soon here. I can't say exactly. Staff has to get back, and they have to work with our IT folks and get it posted. So it should be a day or two, something like that. And we are recording this workshop today, so we'll also post that as quickly as we can get it up there, work with our IT folks. Josh, yeah.
So I work mostly with loans, so this one is kind of not in my wheelhouse. I saw it said that disadvantaged projects, severely disadvantaged projects, are not ranked. So how would those be prioritized in terms of the funding availability?
For small disadvantaged communities and small severely disadvantaged communities, they're not scored and ranked in order to be placed on the fundable list. And then so they're automatically placed on the fundable list. And then internally, what we do is we basically work on projects based on readiness to proceed. And then as they proceed, as we get to a point where we see that there's going to be more projects ready to proceed to funding, then we can fund at any point in time. Then we take a look and we start prioritizing projects. And then, so one is we're prioritizing construction. over planning at this point in time. And so if that happens, we'll fund the construction projects first, and then the planning as soon as funds become available. So once again, if you have a planning project, please don't stop working on it or don't apply. Continue to work with us, and we'll get that funded as soon as possible. And then two, so in construction, if it ends up being that we have more construction projects that are ready to proceed than we can, then we'll take a look at the highest health-based risks, and we'll fund those first, and we'll work our way down the list. But the same thing goes as the planning. Once additional funds become available, we will then take a look at the next set of projects that are ready to proceed, and we will fund them.
You had a slide up there that showed the breakdown of the fundable list, and I believe there was, for the large water systems, you had over $2 billion in estimated cost, and then about $1 billion in estimated loan amounts. What's the discrepancy? Are some of those partially funded, or is that new this year?
Yes, so we're recommending some partially funded projects for this year. And in fact, that sort of brings up another topic, which is there's a couple of projects that are being recommended for a combination of clean water SRF and drinking water SRF funding because they're eligible for both programs. So we're trying to get a little bit out of each of the programs. And so, yeah, the short answer to your question is some of them are recommended for partial funding. It's not unprecedented that we have funded projects with a combination of clean water and drinking water SRF, but kind of the way we're doing it, yeah, that's probably the first time we've ever done it. We did fund the Woodland Davis project a few years ago, their new drinking water treatment plant, surface water treatment plant. That was a combination of clean water and drinking water SRF funds. The drinking water program was at CDPH at the time. So I guess that's the new aspect here is now both programs are at the Water Board, so we're trying to coordinate that even more closely. But we've always had a history of financing, again, SRF with state bond funds, but we've financed jointly with other agencies. USDA is the most common one that we jointly fund with. Bureau of Reclamation will sometimes provide some water recycling funds in conjunction with us. Not that we're working, but we're coordinating with them, and so, yeah, it's not unprecedented. So other questions? Anything else on the email?
Yeah, so we have a question. So they want to know when a non-disadvantaged application is able to get on the fundable list, and is there a cutoff time? So
a non-disadvantaged community, how do they get on the fundable list? Is there a deadline? So what you'll see in the IUP was we evaluated all the applications we had from those communities, and so we've put those, some of those on the fundable list. But as I say, we left it open. There's more flexibility with the drinking water SRF program. So you can submit an application at any time. There's no application deadline. And if you're making good progress, if it looks like you're ready to proceed, and other projects that are on the fundable list aren't proceeding, yes, then we can move forward with an application for another community. Okay, other questions? So, as I say, we're going to do the Clean Water SRF IUP, but we're not going to start that before 10 o'clock. So it looks like it's about 10 to 10. So we'll take a 10-minute break, and we will come back. And again, if there are other questions that people think of on the drinking water IUP, we'll have plenty of time at the end to address those as well. Okay, so we'll be back at 10 o'clock. So it's 10 o'clock, so why don't we get started with the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, IUP. So again, just a quick overview. We've done introductions, talk a little bit about program background, the finances of the program, our analysis and how we came up with a fundable list, quite new for this year. So we'll talk quite a bit about that, I'm sure. What's new, what's the same, implementation and schedule, and then highlight some of the discussion about how to submit comments. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions, I think. So again, just as a reminder, if you're on the webcast, the email address for submitting questions, cleanwatersrf as one word, at waterboards, one word with an S, .ca.gov. So like the Drinking Water SRF, the program is capitalized by grants from the federal government. The Clean Water SRF program was first established in 1987 with amendments to the Clean Water Act. Again, primarily a low-interest loan program, but we do have some limited principal forgiveness. We've had principal forgiveness going back to 2009, so about the last 10 years. And as with the Drinking Water SRF, we do have state funds, primarily state voter-approved bond measures that come appropriated to the Water Board, and we use those in conjunction, complementary to the Clean Water SRF funds. So the Clean Water SRF policy and the IUP are applicable to both the Clean Water SRF program proper as well as those complementary financing sources. We try to run those simultaneously together in a holistic way. The policy, the Clean Water SRF policy, was last amended in November of last year, so fairly recently. And of course, the big theme with the Clean Water SRF program these days is high loan demand, very high loan demand, in excess of $7 billion in financing requests on the program. We can't finance anywhere near that amount. So IUP Basics, as I said, the draft IUP for state fiscal year 1920 has been posted. It's on the Water Board's website. A Lyris email went out with the notice, and so you can go review that. It's on the comments web page that the board clerk posts all the documents for public review, and so you'll find it there. As with the Drinking Water SRF, one of the main purposes of the IUP is it's part of the capitalization grant application that we submit to EPA on a yearly basis. So we've submitted parts of that application already to EPA. Once the IUP is approved by the Water Board, then that will complete the application. And so it talks about, as with the Drinking Water SRF IUP, talks about a lot of federal requirements that are associated with that capitalization grant application. But more importantly, it's the annual business plan for the Clean Water SRF and those complementary financing programs, the finances of those programs, how much money is available, how much staff we have, how much resources we have, and what are the goals of the program and how are we going to achieve those goals. Recent financing from the Clean Water SRF program, similar to the Drinking Water SRF, kind of the pattern is the same. Last 3 or 4 years, been between $1 billion and $1.7 billion. The numbers of projects that were financed, numbers of agreements, quite a bit of a jump there in 16-17 when we got Proposition 1 funds, a lot of grants there. But then, of course, as with the Drinking Water SRF side, we're down quite a bit this year, about a third of what we would typically do this year so far. And that's due to Fiscal. So sorry for repeating, a lot of this is very similar to what I talked about in the Drinking Water SRF for those of you that saw that part, saw that earlier discussion. So I apologize for repeating this, but Fiscal, we're one of a number of agencies that are converting to the Fiscal system. This is the state's new accounting and budgeting system, financial information system for California, I guess is what the acronym stands for. So at the beginning of this state fiscal year, July 1 of 2018, we started entering new commitments into that system. We originally thought that we would have some additional time to convert past commitments, in other words, agreements that had been executed before June 30th of last year. We thought we'd have some more time to convert those. That schedule got accelerated into this state fiscal year, so we're dealing with that right now. So we started converting past commitments as of January 31st of this year. So it's a new system, we're learning the system, there's additional work that goes into making entries in the system. So that has caused a lot of delays. It's caused delays in executing new agreements. It's caused delays in amending existing agreements. We do, of course, final budget amendments. We also do amendments for a lot of other reasons, of course. Those have all been slowed down, and it's slowed down disbursements as well. So if you're an applicant or you're a recipient with a financing agreement, you've probably experienced some of that. Now, DFA and the Water Board is doing everything within our power to try to mitigate that. We've shifted a lot of staff resources, particularly on the administrative side. That's where the biggest impact is. And so folks have been reassigned and are working, double duty, half time doing their normal work and half time doing conversions. I don't want to say that we're completely done with the conversions. That's not a totally accurate statement, but we're on the tail end of that. And so folks are starting to go back, those resources are starting to go back to their normal pattern. But we've shifted a lot of resources, also trying to prioritize those conversions. So of course, small, severely disadvantaged and small disadvantaged communities are always a priority for the board, but also we're looking at those folks that have requested funds. I mean, maybe you're a large agency, but if you start racking up, $10 or $20 million bills, pretty soon those add up pretty quickly. So we're trying to prioritize on that basis as well. And then this is somewhat effective. We can sometimes bundle claims. So if we have a couple of claims in-house, we can try to put those together in one claim, and that may lessen the workload to a certain extent. Doesn't always work, but we sometimes are able to do that. Now, this is a new system, so we're obviously learning a lot of new things. As I say, there's additional work with this new system that we didn't have to do in the old system. So when the new normal is going to be and exactly what the new normal is going to be, that's still an open question at this point. But we hope that sometime during this next fiscal year, we will be able to say, okay, this is the new normal. This is what you should expect from the programs. So with the caveat that, there are always unique aspects of projects. In general, this is the list of eligible project types. As I say, we're combining Clean Water SRF with other state sources of funds. So this is the list of eligible project types from the Clean Water Act. And generally that would cover every situation. But some of these, if you're just asking for state grant funds, some of these might not work. And so with that caveat, just bear that in mind. But there are a wide variety of eligibilities for the programs. And generally we can find a way to finance most projects. Again, eligibility may depend on the funding source, so bear that in mind. But in general, applicants, we're talking cities, counties, special districts, community services districts, wastewater districts, joint powers authorities, state agencies in some cases, nonprofits, private entities, again, select categories and sources, and Native American tribes. And generally costs, all the costs associated with the project, planning, design, construction management, administration, and value engineering are generally eligible. So what underpins all of this, of course, is how much money we have. So as I said earlier, as with the drinking water SRF, we're trying to look at it from a sustainable financing level. We've been leveraging the Clean Water SRF program for the last several years. We didn't sell any bonds for the Clean Water SRF this year. We didn't need to, but we're trying to look at it from a sustainable financing level of approximately $1 billion a year. Of course, many communities are looking for those complementary funds, in particular grant funds or principal forgiveness from the SRF program. So if you look at a small community grant program from a grant and principal forgiveness perspective, about $78 million estimated. Water recycling funding program, we have money. We have some loan funds from Proposition 1. We also expect to get, there's in the budget, money from Proposition 68 for the water recycling funding program. So if you look at it without Proposition 68, about almost $9 million in grant and a little over $100 million in loan. If those Prop 68 funds are appropriated, then you're looking at about $49 million in grant and $137 million in loan. Stormwater, Prop 1, that was our Prop 68 stormwater as well? Just Prop 1. So there is some money left over there, $96 million or thereabouts. Final solicitation in early 2019. Stormwater is an eligible category for the Clean Water SRF as well, so we could combine funds there. And then groundwater from Proposition 1. Grant about $675 million. Round 2 concepts were in early 2018, and then we expect additional solicitations in 2019 and 2020. So you pair that up with what folks are asking for in funding. So if you look at the draft IUP, there's a comprehensive list of all those applications, at least as of February or so. That comprehensive list, about 250 projects requesting over $7 billion in financing. So we're doing something new here with the Clean Water SRF. We did a dry run a bit last year in creating a fundable list. We hadn't had a fundable list per se prior to that. So again, as with the drinking water SRF, you have to be on the fundable list to be eligible to receive financing. So this year, 2018-19, we have a fundable list, and one of the rules in the new policy is if you're on the fundable list, you're on the fundable list until you get funded. And ideally, you know, we would fund everybody on the fundable list by the end of the fiscal year, but if you don't get funded by the end of the fiscal year, then you roll over to the next year's fundable list. So with the fiscal slowdowns, there's quite a few projects on this year's fundable list that are going to roll over. So that's kind of the starting point. The first category here, currently on fundable list, rolling over from this year's fundable list, 77 applications, almost $1.5 billion. Small, severely disadvantaged and small disadvantaged projects are automatically added to the fundable list. Whether there's money, that's a second question, but they're automatically added to the fundable list. That's about 70 projects, primarily looking for grants and principal forgiveness, about $165 million. Then we have new projects that are asking to be put on the fundable list. Almost 100 projects there, 97 projects for $5.2 billion. And then there were a number of folks that had applications in the works, but they said, well, we're not quite ready. We don't think we're going to be, score high enough to get on the fundable list. So we just sort of as a placeholder. They don't want to drop their applications, but they didn't really want to be on the fundable list this year. So another dozen or so for a couple $100 million. So as I say, we have for both programs, Clean Water and Drinking Water SRF, we have a fundable list. You have to be on the fundable list to receive funding. Only projects on the fundable list are eligible. As I say, loan demand greatly exceeds loan capacity, so we did go through this scoring and ranking process, and we were looking to come up with a list that's between, the policy indicates, between 90 and 125% of that sustainable loan capacity. I mentioned earlier about $1 billion. So With that, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole, and she's going to highlight some stuff about small disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged.
Hey, thank you, Christopher. So for those that may not have been with us this morning, I'm Nicole Morgan. I'm a supervising engineer with the Division's Office of Sustainable Water Solutions. The office was created in 2015. We provide grants, principal forgiveness, and low-interest loans to small disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged communities. So applications from small disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged communities are not scored or ranked. They're automatically placed on the Fundable List. However, there is an initial eligibility screening that is conducted by DFA staff prior to be placing on the list. This eligibility is rechecked and confirmed prior to proceeding to funding. So currently for small community grants, the demand exceeds the funding available, just as it does for the drinking water projects. DFA staff qualifies the applications for all available sources of funding. So just like drinking water, keep applying. What we do, we work with you to qualify the project for any source of funding that may be available, and that way you have the best chances of moving forward. Based on readiness to proceed, the project, we base funding primarily based on readiness to proceed and availability of funding at that time. Currently, we're prioritizing construction projects. Doesn't mean that if you have a planning project that don't apply or is not going to move forward. It only means that if it appears that at the time a construction project and a planning project are both ready to move forward, we're going to fund the construction project first. And then once funding becomes available, again, we will prioritize then we'll fund the planning project. So for clean water, slightly different definitions here. So for a small community, it's less than 20,000 people. The income portion is the same as drinking water, however. So for a disadvantaged community, it's less than 80% the median household income when compared to the California median household income. And then for a severely disadvantaged community, it's less than 60% of the California MHI. So for planning grants, so basically 100% for small disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged communities, 100% of the cost is eligible. The maximum grant is $500,000. A little bit different on clean water side is that there is the maximum grant per project includes planning and construction. And so whatever is spent during the planning phase is then subtracted from the maximum amount that can be received during the construction phase. So on the construction side, this is a little bit more complicated. So for communities where, if the MHI is less than 100% the statewide MHI, but the wastewater rate is greater than or equal 4%, the community may be eligible for 50% of their project costs. For disadvantaged communities, and so that is, so if the MHI is less than 80% the statewide MHI, and the wastewater rate is greater than or equal 1.5% as a percentage of the community's MHI, then up to 75% of the eligible costs are eligible for grant. And then for small disadvantaged communities, 100% of the costs are eligible. And so actually it is $6 million that is the maximum grant per project. And I believe that there is a 5-year timeline on that. So for projects, it's communities can receive $6 million over a 5-year period of time. And so then the maximum cost per household per project is $30,000. And so that $500,000 for planning would be subtracted from the $6 million. So septic and sewer and regional projects, in general, they are more expensive projects, and so we have a separate table for those. The general layout is the same. The difference is that septic and sewer projects are eligible for a maximum grant per project of $8 million, and the maximum cost per household is $7,500. $75,000. Let's try that again. That would be really low if it was 7,500. Sorry about that. And so that's recognizing that the septic and sewer regional projects, they're more expensive, and so we're recognizing that with the additional $2 million and the higher costs per household. So that's basically it. Bob. Oh, wait a minute. Actually, I did have one more little note. I apologize. I did have another note here. So, also, septic sewer projects may be eligible for Proposition 1 groundwater funding for small communities. So, if you're a small community, you have a septic sewer project, you also may be eligible for Proposition 1 groundwater funding. You do not need to apply for Proposition 1 groundwater funding. You just apply to the SRF program. We will take a look if the thing that you do need to have is groundwater data showing that there is contamination from failing septic systems. If you have that data, we will take that, we will work with you, we will work internally with the groundwater program to also obtain funding from that program. It is up to $8 million from the groundwater program. That does not take away from the $8 million grant in the Clean Water SCG program. And so those two sources can be combined. We evaluate all projects when they come in. If it appears that you may be eligible for any other funding sources that are within the water boards, we will work with you and notify you of those other funding sources and see if you are eligible.
Thank you, Nicole. So good morning. I'm Bob Ponterary, Senior Engineer with the SRF programs. Got to play with this mic to get it just right. Can everybody hear better? Okay, so I'm going to try to make some sense of the scoring system and how we ended up ranking in the scenarios we went through. So essentially, the score is composed of three components: the primary score, a secondary score, and a readiness score. So I like to look at the primary score. It's more water quality based. It's more our control on the points at what you get. When we're looking at the other two scores for the secondary and readiness, those are more applicant driven, and I'll say that because there are certain things that you can do as consultants or as applicants. Adopting a climate action plan helps you get more points. Readiness, complete applications, having plans and specs, you're basically controlling 7 points of the total score. So for primary score, you can get from 2 to 9 points, I believe. And secondary score is 0 to 4 or 3. Yeah, 3. And the readiness score is 0 to 4. Maximum score would be 16. We take all those, put them together. We group projects together by the score, and then we determine what the cutoff score based on the scenarios that we worked through. So all projects that get a score, if you're in a group, say 14, everybody, if that's the cutoff score, everybody in group 14 gets in. If you're in 13, then you wouldn't be in if this cutoff was at 14. Oops, wrong way. How am I going to fix that? Okay, so we're back to where I messed up. So here we go. All right, so just this screen just shows basically the overall process. So currently, we're at what we call the public review box. Next thing will be coming up is addressing comments, and then of course we're going to adopt it at the board meeting on June 18th. We already went through the process of compiling all the scores and putting them together. We actually sent those scores out to applicants so everybody could look at their score and give us feedback, and we tried to come to consensus on the score. Next slide, please. Okay, so as you can see, this is the different scenarios that we worked through. So just the number, I'll go through the number of projects that we had in each category first. So obviously 16 being the best score, we had nobody that got a 16. We had one project that got a 15, 10 were at 14, and looks like 29 were at 13, and 39 were at 12. So obviously if we went to at D level, we'd be way over our funding target. Our funding target's somewhere between 900 million and 1.25 billion. So if you look at A, didn't quite get us to the minimum. B got us to the maximum, but we looked at it and noticed that we were funding very few projects, so we were only going to catch 10 projects, and we didn't think that would make everybody too happy. So we looked at a different way of doing it. So we actually reduced the partial funding amount down so that we could capture all the 13s. So that would give us, what we're going to recommend going forward to the board is to adopt scenario C. So this is just a different way of looking at it. Scenario C has a cutoff score of 13. So anybody, if you're looking at the IUP that's posted, you go down through there and you see that your project has a 13, then you're in. So as Christopher noted earlier, we have recently adopted a new policy. So these are just some of the new things that are in there. So obviously the new scoring system, the eligible start date. So as he said, that we can now go back to as early as when you issue notice to proceed on a project. But there are some red flags, just as he said. We have to make sure that you've gone through at least our environmental review process before you move forward with that. And if anything was to come up in consultation, if you started before that, then obviously you're basically going at your own risk. So for planning projects, we used to do what we call a refinance. We no longer do that. Now we're going to do a restructure. So what that means is once you get a construction loan, if you had a planning loan, we'll restructure the planning loan to match the terms of the construction loan. So bridge financing, for those that, like currently with Fiscal's issues, a lot of people have been asking this question. So with our permission, bridge financing is an eligible cost. Something else that's new is we can now fund private laterals, and on recycled water projects we can do on-site retrofits. But the key here is there's no direct funding to the homeowners. So that would mean a larger agency would have to foot the bill and then work some other way to get the homeowners to pay it back to them. Next slide. So what's new continued? So principal forgiveness, we're now not calling it principal forgiveness. We're going to call it repayable financing, or non-repayable financing, sorry. We have a new credit review process. New appendices were placed in the policy. They're under appendices N. It just goes over the review process and different rules for the credit review folks that look at their piece of the financial package. So we changed some of the debt coverage services. So we went from 1.1 to 1.2 for senior and parity coverage, and we lowered the subordinate rate to 1.0. So as was stated earlier, we're working on new forms for all the different packages. Those are fairly close to being ready to go. They should be coming to you soon. And as was stated earlier, they're all submitted via FAST. So this is actually something that's new, we're going to actually offer a reduction in the rate if you want to do 20-year financing. So what stays the same? So we're still funding green projects. If you had a green project on a previous fundable list, that means more than likely you're probably going to still receive your green funding. But the key here is for new projects going forward, we had about $32 million available from the funding from 2017, I believe. Once that funding is exhausted, then that green, we'll still fund green project types, but they'll just get loan funding. The reason for that is we needed to make that money available back to the small disadvantaged wastewater folks. We do have the option for match financing, and as was stated, that for a 30-year loan, it works out to a 1.2 effective rate. Application process remains the same, and applications are continuously accepted. The one thing I would like to note here is we do have a deadline for submittal of documents, but that's really just for the scoring purposes. And what it has turned into is it seems like that everybody is holding their applications until December 31st, and then we get this huge flood. So the objective here is not to have that happen. The earlier you can turn in pieces, we know you're in the system. It's probably a better system to do it that way. But we will score whatever has been received on December 31st. That's the idea of that deadline. Again, being on the fundable list is not a guarantee. We're going to still review the project for consistency with our rules and our policy and make sure everything is good. We do fund you as you're ready to go, so it's a give and take at that point when we start the qualitative review. So as the PMs are reviewing, when they ask for documents or if they need questions answered, the sooner you get them that answer, the faster we can move you through the system. So what else has not changed is planning and design costs. We can reach back as far as you incurred the costs. So I know that we have some very large projects that have been in the planning stage for well over 10 years. So, if they wanted to include those costs, they could. So implementation. So the idea here is if your project is on the fundable list, we're going to try to write an agreement by the end of the fiscal year. Obviously, last year we didn't make it. Fiscal had a lot to do with that. It wasn't that the reviews weren't complete. It's just that we just couldn't fit them through the system. Additionally, we'll be doing the a mid-year status update on the IUP. We've been doing that for the past couple years, so I think that's pretty straightforward. We'll just tell you what we've financed to date. Additionally, we do post status reports on the web. Project managers should be informing you on their status as well, and obviously, we like a give and take, so if you're not sure where you're at in the system, just pick up the phone, give them a call, or email them, and they'll be glad to answer your questions. So what's the schedule going forward here? So looks like, today we're having the workshop. The comment letter went out on the 29th, it appears. We're going to hold the second workshop on May 20th. Deadlines to submit is noon on May 27th. We realize, as Christopher said, that I think that's a holiday, so we're going to push it probably to the next day. And a new notice or an update will go out on that to make sure everybody's aware. Adoption of the IUP will take place at our June 18th meeting. And then so it looks like the December 31st deadline, that's for starting the next year's cycle. And then hopefully we'll get everybody's agreements executed by the end of the fiscal year. Submitting comments, so if you look on the notice of opportunity to comment that went out on the Lyris email, has all the information you need. We also have it here. So written comments are due by the deadline the clerk set, which is the 27th, which will probably be pushed to the next day. And those go, you can send those into the clerk, Janine Townsend, if you're mailing it. If you're going to email it, there's an email address box. I don't see it's comment letters at waterboards.ca. There is a limitation on size, so just be aware of that. Obviously, everybody can come to the June 18th meeting and give oral comments. We look forward to hearing from you. And that's it. We'll open it up for questions.
Will any submitted applications need to use the new forms, or is that only for new applications?
If you are ready to submit, you can use the forms that are currently there. We won't have you resubmit new forms. There may be some attachments we may have to ask you to use, but if you're ready to go, you can use what's there.
Thank you. I just have a question with regard to the scoring. I think somebody, either Christopher or you, mentioned that this is really the first full year of implementation of the new scoring system. And I guess my question is, should we assume that that will also be the scoring system for the following year, or kind of is there a process or timing if people wanted to give feedback on that for you to consider any modifications to that?
So at this point, the plan is to use this going forward. Now, you know, I've noted that on average that we amend the Clean Water SRF policy, we've amended about every 2.5 years. So it's not permanent. There will be some point. Yeah. But at this point, we'd have no definite plans to make any definite changes. So it seemed to work out pretty well this year. You know, I mean, what happened this year, if you really look at the details, there was one very large project that scored as a 15. And so even when we got to, I don't know if we can pull that summary back up, talk a little bit more about this. So there was a very large project which scored 14. So when we got to 14, scenario B, we had to do partial funding to make that work. So that was the one kind of quirky thing that happened this year. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but so in future years, but that was okay. I mean, that worked out, and that was part of what we designed the system to do, is to say, okay, here's this range we're shooting for. We're not shooting for an exact number. We're not trying to limit people necessarily, but we've got to have some limitations. And so we bumped up against that range when we got to that score. And the downside of it was, as Bob noted, that there was only 10 projects in that scenario. So that's our historical kind of typical average of agreements is like 35, maybe 40 agreements, 30 to 40 agreements per year. So we didn't think that 10 was going to be very satisfying to folks. So that's why we selected scenario C. So total number of projects, 29 in scenario C. And again, that one had to be limited. There's partial funding in that. The unique thing about that is, as I mentioned earlier, for those when we were talking about the drinking water IUP, that scenario envisions that there are 2 projects that are also going to get drinking water SRF funding. So we're mixing and matching clean water and drinking water SRF funding in scenario C. Other questions?
I had a question on the septic conversion about the private laterals. I didn't quite catch. I understand that you can't make a loan directly to a homeowner, but how does that work again?
So for septic and sewer projects, private laterals, they are eligible for funding. So you're correct, we cannot make the loan or a grant to the private homeowner. What we would do is it's eligible to the applicant, to the agency. The agency, what we call them sometimes is like a mini loan program or something. So because part of the requirements of the funding is that you are committing to operating and maintaining the infrastructure that is being constructed with the funds for the lifetime of the funds. So you're now constructing something on private property. So now you have to put in place an agreement between the agency and the private homeowner of how that's going to be operated and maintained. So you would work out some sort of a program to where they're signing and saying, hey, this is how we're going to do this arrangement. Maybe it's a mini loan program where you're giving them a loan and then they're, over a course of a period of time, they're paying it back. It's, so we do have some examples of where it has been done, and we can work with you and show you some of the examples where it has been done. But that's part of the, the catch is it ends up being a program, and you have to commit to that private lateral is going to be operated and maintained. Well, it's going to be maintained over the lifetime, its lifetime, and that you're not just going to put it in place, walk away, and then it deteriorates. And so, I'm not sure if that answers your question. Okay. Do we have other questions?
Any questions on the web?
If a project does not have an it turned off. Sorry.
Sorry about the delay, folks. We're working through technical issues here.
So if a project does not have an SDAC or DAC applicant, is there any advantage to submitting an incomplete SRF application? Would that help its priority score in the future when the application can be complete?
A complete application will definitely help your chances to make the cutoff score and be put on the fundable list if you're not a small disadvantage or small severely disadvantaged. So the readiness score, there's two parts to the readiness score. One is you get 2 points for a complete application. Complete application is you've got the 4 packages and there's a series of attachments with each package. So if you submit all of those things, not that we've reviewed them, not that we've necessarily don't have any questions about them, but that you've submitted all those pieces, so we theoretically can start our review of that. That's worth 2 points. And then the second part of the readiness score is your readiness for construction. So if you have at least 50% plans and specifications, then you get 1 readiness point. And if you have at least 90% plans and specifications, then you get 2 readiness points. So yes, the short answer to your question is yes. Go ahead, Bob.
I'd like to add, too, that as we're adjusting the forms, the general form is going to be changed to where basically you should be able to self-score your project. So all the questions that we use to score your project will be pretty much on that form. So you'll have a good idea, based on today, you can see 13 made it. So if you're at home or your office and you're getting ready to do something and you realize, oh, I'm only scoring 10, what can I do? So you need to look at those 2 areas where I said you have control and see if you're maximizing your score.
We have two questions from the Union Sanitary District. Will the State Water Board consider lowering the cutoff score in order to get more projects that are critical to agencies like ours?
So of course, the Water Board is the one that's going to approve or not approve the IUP. This is the staff recommendation, and so we did look at, I don't know if we can bring up those scenarios again. We could conceivably go to scenario D. That would be a total of 39 projects. And so that why we chose C rather than D is we'd have to severely limit partial funding even more so. And as I say, with scenario C, what we were proposing is that 2 projects would get a combination of clean water funds and drinking water SRF funds. Scenario D would envision that those projects would get drinking water funds totally, just drinking water funds for $925 million. Now, if you remember, I mentioned that the sustainable capacity, loan capacity for the drinking water SRF, around $400 million per year. You saw the amount for the fundable list for the drinking water SRF was over $1 billion. So we're stretching that sustainable funding capacity because we are trying to increase the funding from the drinking water SRF program as we're trying to increase the funding from the clean water SRF program. But if you're already starting out with $925 million from those 2 projects, you're even more squeezing out other applicants for the drinking water SRF. So it was kind of a balancing act to say, yeah, we could recommend D. I mean, yeah, if I came up with partial funding, I could lower that $1.7 billion to 1.25, but then I'm shifting a lot of funding over to the drinking water SRF program, and so it was squeezing things a little bit too much. So that's our recommendation to C. Again, the board is the ultimate decider of, that's our recommendation at this point.
If we are open to partial financing, will that increase the odds that the State Water Board will lower the cutoff score?
At this point, our recommendation is C. C includes partial funding for a number of projects. It includes partially funding 5 projects. Each of them there's quite a gap between most projects and the ones that are recommended for partial funding. Each of those projects is greater than $90 million. I think the smallest one is, I remember the numbers, but it was a couple $100 million. And then 24 projects at 100%. Those 24 projects are all less than $90 million. And then, like I say, 2 of those projects are a combination of clean water SRF loan and drinking water SRF loan. So we've already squeezed it as much as we can. I appreciate the offer to take partial funding, but it really doesn't change the fundamental dynamic of those different scenarios there.
Please provide examples of projects that are eligible for clean water SRF funding.
There's quite a wide variety. I don't know if we can bring up that list there. The vast majority of projects that we finance are publicly owned treatment works infrastructure, wastewater treatment plants and collection systems and pump stations and those sorts of things. But we can fund anything. The state has, there's wastewater treatment plants are point sources of pollution. They're issued a non-NPDES permit. That is a point source permit. There are also non-point sources of pollution, urban runoff, agricultural pollution, all sorts of different. So the state has a non-point source implementation plan that identifies those sources of pollution that don't have a point source. And so anything in that plan is eligible for the Clean Water SRF program. The state has 3 nationally designated estuaries: San Francisco Bay, Morro Bay, and Santa Monica Bay. Each one of those national estuaries has a plan similar to the non-point source plan. They're very interested in sources of pollution that run into those bodies of water and cause pollution and degrade the water in those. So each one of those plans, any project you can identify in one of those plans is eligible for the Clean Water SRF. Then in 2014, Congress added eligibilities 5 through 12. Several of these are redundant, and there were things that we could already do, but needless to say, Congress added them. So manage, reduce, treat, or recapture stormwater or subsurface drainage water. So stormwater projects are eligible for the Clean Water SRF. We can fund measures to reduce demand on publicly owned treatment works through water conservation, efficiency, or reuse. That's a whole broad area that all sorts of things could probably fit in. Watershed projects, public agency measures to reduce energy consumption at PODWs. Could already do that, but okay, that's good. Nothing wrong with that. Reusing or recycling wastewater, stormwater, or subsurface drainage water. Pretty much could do those things already. Increase security of POTWs. Nonprofits and operators of small POTWs to help them plan, develop, and obtain financing and achieve compliance with the Clean Water Act. Qualified nonprofits to repair and replace individual decentralized wastewater treatment systems or connect individual households to a POTW. Those are things that we pretty much could have done already prior to 2014. But so it's anything really related to water pollution, we can probably find a way to make it eligible for the Clean Water SRF program. So, any other questions in the audience here? Other questions from the email? Oh, ran out of battery. New battery. So again, just a reminder, we apologize for not getting the IUPs out for you to review in advance of this, a little sooner than this. I realize that you probably haven't had had sufficient time to take a look at that and formulate questions. That's why we've added a second workshop. That's going to be on May 20th, the afternoon of May 20th at 1 p.m. And so I don't know that we'll necessarily go through the presentations totally like we did today, but want to give people enough time to read through it, think about their questions, have some additional discussion. I'm not trying to be secretive about this. And really appreciate you folks coming out today and joining us on the web. And so again, we're recording this presentation here today, and we'll post the PowerPoints as well as the recording here. Give us a day or two to get that up on the website. Anything you want to add, Leslie?
Again, I want to thank everybody. This was kind of our inaugural scoring, and many of you participated in developing the scoring, so now you get to see what the results of that were. And I think that the thing I wanted to mention is obviously with the rollover we had from the fundable list of the current year to next year, you know, when we were looking at the options, we really didn't want to limit the number of projects, so we really tried to have the program reach as many people as possible. Obviously, it's a really aggressive list of projects. When you look at, I think our rollover was, since we, yeah, did you say 77 projects? So it's, you know, it's really going to be a challenging year next year. So all of you that are on the fundable list, you know, I ask you to work closely with us, you know, be really responsive. We're going to work as hard as we can to get all those projects executed, but it's, you know, when I look at it, I know that realistically we can't get all of that done, but we're going to work as hard as we can because we don't want to end up the following year not being able to add additional projects. So that's one of the, you know, questions some of the board members ask us is, how are you guys going to do this? And we understand, we recognize it, we recognize there's a huge workload ahead of us. We're gonna do our best, and you know, the more that you can just agree with our terms and sign that agreement, the easier it is to get through all those projects. But I do really want to thank you all for your interest and for your support and your recommendations, because we are always looking at ways that we can make things more efficient and get through these and you know, make the program the best that it can be. So as we look forward to potentially, you know, policy changes in the future, we will be always looking at what we're doing, what the results of it were, you know, how it worked out for people. And so your feedback is important to us, and I know the board wants to hear about it too. So, you know, we do encourage your comments on this, on, you know, how it worked out, what you think, you know, how you think things could have been better, and we also encourage you to, as I think Bob mentioned, don't wait till the last minute in December, because that does jam our staff up then, because we have to score all those projects after December to get the draft IUP out. So you can see, like, we're delayed this year. You know, we had a number of factors, and that's one of them that does influence our staff workload is we've got a limited amount of time to do that scoring between December 31st and when we need to get the IUP out. So to the extent you can help us help you, that'll help everyone. So thanks.
And I guess I would just reemphasize too, Bob, you know, mentioned that the general package, we're going to have the questions on there, so you can do some self-scoring. So I know it's hard this year. You know, project managers did send out the worksheets, the scoring worksheets to all their applicants. But of course, the applicant could only see theirs. They had no idea what everybody else is scoring. So I know it's going to take a year or two for folks to kind of build up, well, what is a likely cutoff score? But, and so hopefully that will help people focus on those things that are going to have a chance to get on the fundable list. And so my hope is, whether this is true, whether this be true or not, I don't, my hope is that over time that $7 billion demand will come down. So we won't be scoring a whole lot of applications that score 6 or 7, you know, they're just, folks are just going to recognize that's not likely to be fundable. These other projects, though, are likely to be fundable, so I'm going to try to compete for those. So, any other questions? Yeah, go ahead, Beth.
To qualify for a small SDAC, DAC status for a regional project, do requirements need to be met for the combined stakeholder communities or individually?
So for regional projects, one of the communities need to be qualified as a small disadvantaged community, not the combination of the two or multiple systems. However, we do look at the amount of funding that will go to the each of the systems. And so say there were two, one does not qualify for a small disadvantaged community, one does. We would look at the amount of the project that benefits the small disadvantaged community. That is the portion of the project that would be eligible for grants, principal forgiveness, for that portion of the IUP. The amount of the project that benefits the portion of the community that is not a small disadvantaged community would then be eligible for loans. And the same thing would go for if it was more than two. The same analysis occurs, and we look at each community individually, and then finance it. However, the one benefit is that if it is a project with a small disadvantaged community, it comes to my group. So it will if it's a regional project, it's it's regionalizing, or septic sewer or something, it does come to my group and it is automatically on the fundable list. Are there any more from online? Any additional questions in the room? Okay, I'll turn it over to Christopher.
Well, again, thank you everybody for your interest, and thanks for coming. And you know, again, the Clean Water IUP is posted. We hope the drinking water will be posted very soon. If you have any, certainly submit comment letters or come to the board. If you have any questions, you know, are you confused about anything? The notice, I do believe, includes staff contacts, correct? You and Elnaz are listed on, so Beth Brown, Elizabeth Brown, and Elnaz Nasai are listed for the Clean Water SRF IUP. Their phone numbers and addresses, email addresses are there. Don't hesitate to reach out to them if you're confused about anything, needs some pointers. And then Tatiana Guillen is on the Drinking Water IUP. She'll be on there, so her phone number and contact information will be on there as well. So with that, again, thank you everybody for coming, and we look forward to hearing from you.